Hey, what's up guys, it's Kelly and today I'm sharing some books that you have probably never heard of. If you find yourself enjoying this video then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps me out, and if you're new here and would like to see more of me then please subscribe. These are books that I think deserve a lot more love than they get. They're just books that I don't really see other people talking about. They're books that when I mention them to other people they've pretty much never heard of them. They're just books that I really loved, that I thought were really good, that I think deserve a lot more love. So today I thought I would share them with you guys and hopefully you can get some slightly unexpected recommendations. I have decided to turn this into a little like 3-part series. So as I was going through my shelves I was just seeing so many books that I wanted to feature, so I thought I would split it up and do an adult one, a YA one, and then a middle grade one. So today obviously we're doing the adult books. So the first 3 are books that you probably have heard about if you've been here for, I'd say, the last year or so, because they are books that I really love and that I do mention relatively often. First up I'm going to share the only one that I've ever heard other people talk about, and that is What Red Was by Rosie Price. This was one of my favourite books of 2019. I thought it was absolutely amazing. This primarily follows the friendship between Kate and Max, who meet in their first year of university and become best friends and completely inseparable, but they come from very different worlds. Kate comes from kind of a regular working class family, whereas Max comes from an extremely affluent, like old money kind of family, and all of the kind of tradition and strings that come along with that. And although Kate is completely not from the same kind of world that Max is, loving him and being his friend means that she gets drawn into that kind of world. And they're having a party just after their graduation, I think, and she is sexually assaulted. And the book follows her trauma and her struggling to come to terms with this and struggling to deal with this. And it also looks at the way that kind of class and money and privilege come into situations like that and how they influence and complicate situations like that. I'm doing such a bad job of explaining this because I don't want to give spoilers, but it also looks at, should you stay silent or should you speak out? And once you have spoken out about something like being sexually assaulted, who does your story belong to? Does it still belong to you? Do you still get to control the narrative? Or does the person that you've spoken to get to have any say in the narrative? And I thought it explored that side of things brilliantly. This was an absolutely heartbreaking book to read. I found it incredibly difficult to read. In fact, the first time I picked it up I actually had to put it down. I first started reading it when I was not in a great place with my mental health. I was experiencing quite a severe mental health dip. There's the noon gun, in case any of you were wondering what time it is where I am. Yeah, I was not in the best space mentally when I started reading this, and it doesn't say in the blurb for this book that she was sexually assaulted, although I think it should. The reason that I've mentioned that is because it is obviously a very triggering thing for some people to read about, so I think it's important going into the book knowing that that's what happens to her. And kind of as I started reading I was like, I am not in the space to read about this happening to someone. So I put it down and then I read some like cutesy fluffy romance, and I came back to it about a month later where I was just in a much happier place and in a much more comfortable place, and I flew through it. I read it in about 3 days, but it was extremely emotionally and mentally taxing. I kind of finished it and I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know that I can read anything as follow-up to this. I didn't really know how to exist in the world for a few days. Also, understandably, after Kate is assaulted, her mental health starts to really deteriorate and she starts having quite severe PTSD and she falls into a very depressive period. There are trigger warnings for disordered eating, massive trigger warning for self-harm, and although I have never been sexually assaulted, I do have, you know, mental health issues, and reading this was I never thought that I was someone to get triggered easily, but like reading this was a visceral experience. Everything that she said, I could feel. It wasn't triggering in that it took me back to a bad place and left me there, but it really brought those emotions and those feelings like flooding back. So on a personal level, it was very difficult to read. And then on like an intellectual and emotional level, it was very difficult to read about the things that happened to her that I haven't experienced. So I will say, if you're easily triggered, just avoid this book like the plague, because even for someone who is not easily triggered, it was a bit triggering. And as I said, like for a day or two afterwards, I was just kind of a zombie while I came to terms with how I felt about this book. And yeah, this book was it was an experience. So as I mentioned, I did see a couple of people posting about this, but really it was like a handful. When it came out, it was gifted to a lot of people, so it did pop up a couple of times on my Instagram, but on the whole I really haven't seen a lot of people talking about this, and I think that more people should. I think that it is a beautifully written, albeit very difficult book to read, and I think it's a very important book that discusses very important topics, and I think that more people should read it. So please do. Again, if you think that you are in a place where you mentally and emotionally can cope with it. Next we have Broken Branches by M. Jonathan Lee. This is another one that will probably at least sound familiar to you if you've been here for a while, because I did post a full review with my thoughts on this book 2 years ago? 3 years ago, possibly? It was a long time ago, but I absolutely loved this. So this is about a man called Ian who lives in a cottage somewhat cut off from the rest of the world, like out in the countryside, with his wife and their daughter, and his family has lived in this cottage for generations, but there's been like a tragedy in every generation. He starts to think that there is like a curse on their family or on the house, or possibly on this creepy tree that they have in their backyard, and the creepy tree. And I read this quite a long time ago, so I'm fuzzy on the details, but he starts obsessively researching his family and kind of trying to place what could be going on, because surely family curses aren't real, right? And he becomes really, really obsessive, and it starts taking over his whole life. It starts damaging his relationship with his wife, with his daughter, but he just can't stop. He has to know what is happening to his family. I thought that this was brilliantly written. I thought that it was such a clever story. The plot twist at the end was just... This was probably the first thriller that I'd read in like 4 years, and I loved every moment of it. If you like your thrillers with a generous helping of family drama, 10 out of 10 would recommend. It's so like creepy and atmospheric, and everything about this book is amazing. Then the last one that there's a very good chance you've heard me talking about on my channel is I Still Dream by James Smythe, or Smeeth. This is about a girl called Laura who in her early teens starts developing an AI which she uses as a virtual therapist. It's like an AI chat box. And this is in the 90s or 80s. Does it start in the 90s or 80s? It starts in the 90s. And she starts developing this AI, and then the book jumps ahead a decade at a time and shows how Laura's life is changing, shows how the AI is developing, and also shows how other AIs have started developing. This reads like an episode of Black Mirror, or like a very extended episode of Black Mirror, because it is a little bit chunky, but I read it really quickly because I enjoyed it so much. I think in the space of about a month I read this and then watched marathoned like 2 seasons of Black Mirror, and afterwards I just looked at my phone and I was like, stay away, bitch. I was very paranoid about technology for a little while. In fact, Alan had just moved to Cape Town and he was staying in a terrible Airbnb, and he'd just been messaging me or phoning me about like how bad this place he was staying was, and then he got an email from Airbnb asking him to rate his accommodation, and I was just like, it's listening to us. It was all very creepy. I was very paranoid. I am very like into the conspiracy theories about how technology is spying on us. It is spying on us. If you too are a big fan of conspiracy theories about technology and enjoy Black Mirror, I would recommend this. The writing was great, the characterization was awesome. It's just a really good, interesting, somewhat scary sci-fi. Next, I would like to talk about Phantom by Susan Kay. This is another one that I've seen one other person talk about, and that is Emma from Emmy. This is her favourite book of all time, and I loved this book when I read it and had kind of forgotten about it until I saw it mentioned on her channel, and I was like, oh my gosh, I loved that book. So I, from the age of about 10, have been obsessed with the Phantom of the Opera film. It is one of my favourite movies of all time. It is amazing. I love the Phantom of the Opera. Like, it's one of my favourite musicals, and then the film is one of my favourite films. I have never read the original Phantom of the Opera, but when I was, how old? 2013. When I was 16 or 17, my mum found this book called Phantom and picked it up because she saw that it was like related to Phantom of the Opera, and she read it, thought it was amazing, and then passed it on to me because she knew how much I loved Phantom. So this book follows the original Phantom of the Opera story and kind of retells it, but also acts as, I guess, a prologue to it, because it starts from Eric's birth, Eric being the Phantom of the Opera, and then it goes through his whole life until the events of the Phantom of the Opera. So it shows you how he got to that point, how he got to the Paris Opera House, and there's a moment in the musical, and I'm sure in the book, where Madame Giry says, you know, he's a composer and an architect and an artist, and this book explores his whole history and how he came to be all of those things, and how he spent some time, I think, as a stonemason, and he spent some time as an architect. I think, in fact, he worked on the Paris Opera House. It's been a while since I've read it. If you can hear random music and talking, or more likely shouting, Alan is busy watching The Hollow Crown in the next room. So this really explores his character in depth, and I mean, it's a character I've always been incredibly sympathetic to. Your girl loves a dark bad boy. But it really does make him a much more sympathetic character, because you realise how traumatic his life has been. I mean, you see him and you see his face and know that he was like that from birth, and you can kind of understand how he got to be the way that he is. But this explores that in so much more detail, and you see like literally from the moment he was born, his mother covered him up with a mask and just had like no love or no compassion for him. When he says, "The world showed no compassion to me," hits you another way once you've read this book. Although obviously it was inspired by the original text, you can definitely see that she took inspiration from the musical as well. There are lines that are lifted like almost directly, and there are other allusions to it. One of the many things that I loved about this book is when you get to the part where it's kind of retelling the Phantom of the Opera, it goes much more in depth into the events of the story and also his relationship with Christine. And I have always been a Phantom stan, so I loved seeing their relationship developed a bit more, and it was so beautiful. And this book is amazing, and the writing is phenomenal, and I loved everything about it, and really would recommend it to fans of the Phantom of the Opera. I mean, I would recommend it to fans of the musical, having not read the book, but the fact that like Phantom is Emma's favourite classic of all time, and Phantom of the Opera is Emma's favourite classic of all time, and she still loves Phantom so much, I think says a lot about, you know, yeah, I love this book, and actually I would really like to get my own copy of it. And then the last book I wanted to talk about is Heft by Liz Moore, which I stumbled across in my high school library, and it had a really striking cover. I'm going to see if I can find a picture of the same edition that I read, and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting, whatever. It was break time and I was sitting in the library with my friends and I just wanted something to read, so I picked it up and started reading it and enjoyed it so much. So this is told in alternating perspectives. First up we have Arthur, who used to be an academic. He was a university professor. He now weighs 550 pounds and is housebound. The other perspective is a teenage boy called Kel, who his mother Charlene used to be a student of Arthur's, and she contacts Arthur and with this plea for help that he will kind of help her son and guide her son, from what I remember, and help him to make a success of his life, because he has a potentially very promising future career in baseball if he can just stay out of his family's drama. I really loved this book. I thought it was just so special and so different from anything that I'd read. This was one of those books that like absolutely was so character driven, there was almost no plot, but if you could enjoy these two characters, you would enjoy the book. So I, as a general rule, really enjoy multiple points of view. However, they can be difficult to write. You have to be quite a good writer to make it work, because you have to be able to give each character a very distinctive voice. I believe that I shouldn't have to look at the chapter heading to know who's speaking. I should, as soon as I've read like the first paragraph of the chapter, I should be able to know who it is from like their speech patterns or their internal monologue, and I absolutely found that in this book. I mean, one of them is like an aging ex-academic and one of them is a 17-year-old, so one would hope that they would have quite distinct voices, and they really did. I really enjoyed being in both of their narratives, and I thought their narratives were just really well written and extremely distinct from each other, as I said. And then I just want to read, this was back in the day when I still wrote Goodreads reviews, which I'd actually really like to get back into doing, but the last line of my review is, "It's really just a beautiful novel exploring human emotions, relationships, and learning to accept life as it happens." And I think that that's really what you need to know about this book. So I will say I've encountered this book in the hands of one other person. I was at a friend's house one day and I noticed it on her shelves, and she actually said that when she'd seen it, she'd remembered me talking about it. So still, it's something that like I haven't heard anyone else talk about, because even the one person I know who's read this book read it kind of because of me. So there are 5 books that I think just deserve a lot more love and a lot more attention than I've seen them get. Also, if you happen to have seen any of these books like on other people's channels or on people's bookstagrams, or if you have read any of these books and really enjoyed them, then let me know in the comments, because then I need to be following you guys, because clearly we enjoy the same things. Also, please feel free to leave me suggestions for books that you feel are underrated, that you feel like not enough people have heard of. I'd love to go check them out. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, if you did enjoy this, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You can also find all of my social media links in the description below, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye!